This garage belongs to the neighborhood now!
That's what the HOA president shouted before she grabbed my padlock with both hands and kicked the steel door hard enough to scuff the metal. I stood on my porch 10 feet away, watching a woman in pearl earrings assault my property in front of 4 security cameras. She'd spent 3 years running my garage like a rental, charging every household $200 a year, collecting $84,000, listing it as a community amenity without my permission. She'd changed my locks, paraded strangers through my dead wife's workshop, so I chained it shut. And she lost her mind in broad daylight. She didn't know every second was being recorded and forwarded to the county DA. What would you have done? I moved to Linden Falls in the summer of 2019. My wife Ellen found the listing. A quiet subdivision in Forsyth County, Georgia. Big lots, mature oaks, the kind of street where people wave from their porches and nobody locks their doors. Ellen loved the backyard, a 1/4 acre of Bermuda grass sloping down to a creek lined with river birch. I loved the setback, enough room for a detached garage, not a carport, not a shed, a real shop. 1,200 square feet of poured slab, steel frame, and insulated walls. I designed it myself. 26 years as a structural engineer meant I didn't need a contractor. I pulled the permits, poured the footings, and welded the frame on weekends, while Ellen sat in a folding chair, reading paperbacks and handing me cold, sweet tea. She picked the workbench, solid white oak, 4 inches thick, from a mill outside Dahlonega. She said it had to be oak because oak lasts forever. She was right about the bench. She was wrong about forever. Ellen was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in October of 2020. She was gone by February. 5 months. That's all the time between something doesn't feel right and a funeral in the rain. After she died, the garage became the only place I could breathe. I'd go out there at 9, 10, 11 at night, sit on the stool she used to sit on, run my hands along the oak, sand something, build something, listen to the radio and pretend she was still in the folding chair behind me. The smell of cedar shavings and machine oil became the closest thing I had to comfort. Tammy Winslow showed up 6 weeks after the funeral. White Cadillac Escalade, blonde bob, Gucci sunglasses pushed up on her head, clipboard in one hand, the other hand already reaching for my screen door like she owned the place. She smelled like department store perfume, the kind that arrives before the person does. Garrett, honey. She said it like we'd been friends for years. We'd spoken exactly twice. The 4th of July committee needs somewhere to store the folding tables and chairs. Your garage is just sitting there. It'd be such a blessing to the community. I should have said no. I know that now. But I was 4 months into grief, eating frozen dinners, and too tired to fight a woman with a clipboard and a smile that looked like a warning. I said she could use it for 1 week. 1 week. She nodded, patted my arm like I was a child who'd made the right choice, and drove away. The folding tables arrived the next morning. 6 of them. Then 8 chairs. Then a stack of plastic coolers. Then a box of patriotic bunting that smelled like a storage unit. 1 week became 2. 2 became a month. The tables stayed. The chairs multiplied. Somebody left a broken leaf blower by the door. I mentioned it to Tammy at the mailbox. She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, Garrett, it's just easier to leave them there. You don't mind, do you, sweetie? I minded. But I didn't say it loud enough. It was my neighbor Hank Ellison, 67, retired electrician. The kind of man who notices everything and says it plain, who told me the truth. Garrett, you know she gave out copies of your key, right? I saw her at the hardware store last Tuesday. She made 6 duplicates. 6. I checked the lock that night. My key still worked, but the brass was scratched in a way it hadn't been before. Fresh marks around the keyhole. The kind you get when someone unfamiliar jams a new copy in for the first time. I stood in my own garage, surrounded by other people's junk, and for the first time since Ellen died, I felt something besides sadness. I felt the slow, cold burn of someone taking what wasn't theirs. Things got worse, fast. I took a consulting job in Savannah. 3 days. A bridge retrofit that needed a structural review before the county would release funding. It was the first time I'd left Linden Falls for work since Ellen died, and I almost didn't take it. But the money was decent, and sitting in an empty house wasn't making anything better. I came home on a Thursday evening. The garage door was open, not cracked, wide open. The overhead fluorescent lights were on, my electricity, and I could hear voices inside before I even turned off the engine. I walked in and stopped. My workbench, Ellen's workbench, had been shoved against the far wall. My tool racks were half dismantled. Somebody had installed 3 sets of cheap particle board shelving along the south wall, the kind you buy at a big box store for $40 and pray it doesn't collapse. They were loaded with HOA supplies, folding tables, stacked chairs, boxes of event decorations, a plastic tub labeled "Holiday Lights, Do Not Remove." And on the wall next to the door, someone had taped a handwritten schedule. Monday, Garden Club, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Wednesday, Book Drive Sorting, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Friday, Event Prep Committee. Saturday, Open Access. Open access to my garage, on my property, using my electricity. I called Tammy. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the Escalade's turn signal clicking in the background. Tammy, someone rearranged my entire garage. There's a schedule on the wall. Oh, isn't it wonderful? The community voted at last month's meeting. Everyone agreed the workshop should be available to residents. You should be proud, Garrett. You're contributing something real. I didn't vote for that. I wasn't at the meeting. Well, that's the thing about democracy, sweetie. It moves forward whether you show up or not. She hung up. I stood there holding my phone in a garage that smelled like cheap paint and particle board glue instead of cedar and machine oil. The oak workbench had a new scratch across the top. Someone had dragged something heavy across it without caring. I ran my finger along the mark. It was deep, the kind of scratch you can sand out if you catch it early, the kind that becomes permanent if you wait too long. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I typed Linden Falls HOA Community Amenities into the search bar. The HOA website loaded with Tammy's smiling face at the top, arms crossed, standing in front of the community sign like she'd built the whole neighborhood herself. I scrolled down to the amenities section. Pool, tennis courts, walking trails, and there, at the bottom, a new entry, Sullivan Workshop, open to all Linden Falls residents. Contact HOA office for scheduling and availability. My name, my garage, listed as a public amenity on a website I'd never been asked about. I clicked the link. It went to a page with photos of my garage interior, my tools on the wall, my workbench, Ellen's workbench, posted online like a rental listing for property that belonged to me. I learned something that night that most homeowners never think about until it's too late. When an HOA lists private property as a community amenity, especially in real estate disclosures, they're not just being rude, they're committing misrepresentation, and the liability doesn't fall on the homeowner, it falls on whoever listed it. Every new buyer who purchased a home in Linden Falls, expecting access to a community workshop, had been sold a lie. And the person who told that lie was Tammy Winslow. I screenshot every page. I printed each one with a timestamp. I saved them to a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence. Then I opened a second folder and labeled it Timeline. Hank stopped by the next morning. He stood in the driveway looking at the open garage like it was a crime scene. She listed it on the website? He shook his head slowly. Brother, she's selling your property without you knowing. That woman's been running this neighborhood like it's her personal yard sale. I didn't answer. I was already making a list of every person who'd walked into my garage without permission, every tool that had been moved, every hour of electricity I hadn't been asked to pay for, and the name of every real estate agent who'd shown a house in Linden Falls with the words Community Workshop in the listing. The scratch on Ellen's workbench caught the morning light. It looked deeper than it had the night before. Some damage only gets worse when you leave it alone. But the website was just the surface. The real surprise was waiting for me at the next HOA meeting. The HOA quarterly meeting was held on a Wednesday night in September, inside the community center at the entrance to Linden Falls. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs arranged in rows, a folding table at the front, where Tammy sat flanked by Craig on her left and Denise Pruitt, the treasurer, on her right. The room smelled like instant coffee and carpet cleaner. About 40 residents showed up. Most of them looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A few held phones under the table, scrolling through anything to avoid eye contact with Tammy. I sat in the back row next to Hank, who had a notepad on his knee and a pen he kept clicking. Tammy ran through the agenda like a CEO presenting to shareholders. Pool maintenance, landscaping contract renewal, a reminder about trash can placement. Then she clicked to a new slide on the projector. Budget report. I saw it before she said it. Third line from the bottom, in bold. Workshop maintenance fund, $28,000 collected. I raised my hand. Tammy looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student who's about to ask the wrong question. Yes, Garrett? What workshop? She smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Your workshop, Garrett. The one we all share. As you know, the board implemented a modest workshop access fee to cover maintenance and insurance. $200 per household per year. Very reasonable. I never agreed to share my garage, and I never agreed for you to charge people to use it. The smile hardened. She turned to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the kind of selfish attitude that makes community living difficult. Show of hands. Who here has used the community workshop? Hands went up. 60% of the room, maybe more. People who'd stored holiday decorations in my garage. People who'd borrowed my tools. People who'd walked into my property on a schedule Tammy created and never once questioned whether it was legal. Tammy turned back to me. The majority is spoken. Moving on. She clicked to the next slide before I could respond. Craig leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, smirking. Denise scribbled something in her ledger without looking up. The room shifted, and I felt 40 sets of eyes avoid mine like I'd just broken a rule nobody wanted to name. After the meeting, I walked to the front table. Denise was packing up her binder. I kept my voice level. Denise, I'd like to see the HOA financial records, all accounts. Last 3 fiscal years. She blinked. You'd need board approval for that. No, I don't. Georgia Code, Section 44-3-232. Every member of a property owners association has the right to inspect financial records. You have 5 business days. Denise looked at Tammy. Tammy looked at me. I'll put the request in writing, I said. Certified mail. Return receipt. Tammy stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell the perfume again. Sweet, aggressive, the kind that fills a room whether you want it to or not. You're making enemies, Garrett. Her voice was low, almost soft, but her eyes were flat. This neighborhood has been just fine without you stirring things up. I'd think very carefully about how far you want to push this. I didn't blink. 5 business days, Tammy. Here's something every homeowner in a managed community should know. Under Georgia law, your HOA is required to let you see the books. Not summaries, not reports. The actual bank statements, receipts, and transaction records. If they refuse, you can file a lawsuit and the HOA has to pay your attorney's fees. Most boards comply because they know the law. The ones that don't comply usually have something to hide. I sent the letter the next morning. Certified mail. Signature required. Delivery confirmed by noon. That night I sat on the porch and looked at my garage across the yard. The fluorescent lights were on inside. Someone was in there. I could hear the scrape of folding chairs being moved across concrete. My property, my electricity, my dead wife's workbench being used as a shelf for somebody's yard sale donations. The crickets sang in the tall grass along the creek. The light from the garage flickered through the gap under the roll-up door. That cheap fluorescent buzz that sounds like a headache waiting to happen. I sat there until whoever was inside left. They didn't lock up. They never did. The door stayed cracked open, the light still bleeding through, like the building had stopped belonging to me, and I was the only one who'd noticed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. A car door closed. The neighborhood went on being the neighborhood. Nobody asked why the widower's garage was open at 11 o'clock at night, with strangers walking in and out. Nobody asked because Tammy had made it normal. And that was the part that burned the most. 5 business days passed. No records, no response. I sent a follow-up letter, same format, certified, signature required. The receipt came back signed by Denise Pruitt. On the 6th day, I came home from the hardware store with a bag of sandpaper and a quart of Danish oil. I walked across the yard toward the garage, reached for the lock, and stopped. The lock was different. New brass, new brand. The kind of heavy-duty padlock you buy when you want to make a point. My key slid in halfway and jammed. I pulled it out, tried again. The teeth didn't match. Cold metal against my fingers, smooth where it should have been rough, wrong in a way that felt deliberate. I stood there in my own driveway holding a key that no longer opened my own building. I called Tammy. She answered like she'd been waiting for it. "Oh, the lock?" The board voted last night to upgrade security on all community facilities. Standard procedure, for everyone's protection. "Tammy, it's my garage." "Sweetie, the community has been maintaining that space for over a year. At this point, it's a shared asset. If you have concerns, I'd suggest you contact our attorney." "Who changed the lock?" "Thompson's Lock and Key. Very professional. They do all our community work." She said community the way someone stamps a document, like the word itself made it legal. I hung up and stood in the driveway for a long time. The afternoon sun hit the new lock and it gleamed like a fresh scar. My hands smelled like brass and frustration. I didn't break the lock. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called Hank. He came over within 10 minutes, still wearing his reading glasses and carrying a mug of coffee. He looked at the new lock, then at me, then back at the lock. "Thompson's Lock and Key," he said. "Eddie Thompson?" "That's what she said." Hank took a sip of coffee. "Eddie Thompson is Craig Winslow's first cousin. Same family reunion every 4th of July. I've seen them together at the VFW fish fry 3 years running." Craig Winslow, Tammy's husband. The man who sat on the Forsyth County Planning Commission and smirked at me from the front table of every HOA meeting. His cousin changed the lock on my property under Tammy's orders. The whole thing was a family operation. The next morning, I called Steve Pemberton, licensed surveyor. He came out that Friday with his equipment, a total station on a yellow tripod, a rod with a prism, and a clipboard thick with plat maps. He spent 4 hours walking my lot lines while I sat on the porch and watched. His report was clean, crystal clear. The garage sat entirely on lot 47, my lot. The nearest common area boundary was 31 feet from the northeast corner of the garage. There was zero overlap, zero encroachment, zero ambiguity. The structure was 100% on private property, built under Forsyth County Permit number B-2019-04417, inspected and approved. Here's something worth knowing if you ever find yourself in a property dispute with an HOA. A license survey is the single most powerful piece of paper you can hold. It's based on recorded plats, county records, and physical measurements. It's admissible in court, and it doesn't care what your HOA president thinks. If the survey says it's your land, it's your land, period. I made 3 copies of the report, one for my files, one for my attorney, one to keep in my truck. That night I stood in front of the garage. The new lock hung there, brass catching the porch light, mocking me from a door I'd hung myself. I held the survey report in my hand. The paper rustled in the evening breeze, warm Georgia air carrying the smell of cut grass and pine sap from the tree line behind the creek. For the first time since Ellen died, I felt something sharp and clear cutting through the fog. Not just anger, purpose. Tammy Winslow had spent a year and a half treating my property like her personal storage unit. She'd charged money for it. She'd changed the locks on it. She'd posted it on a website and paraded strangers through it. But she'd never once checked whose name was on the deed, and that was going to be the most expensive mistake of her life. I folded the survey, slid it into my back pocket, and walked inside. The kitchen light was on. Ellen's handwriting was still on the grocery list, stuck to the fridge, the last list she ever wrote. Eggs, half and half, sandpaper, 220 grit. I looked at it every day. Tonight it didn't make me sad. It made me steady. I hired Walt Jeffries on a Monday morning. His office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building in downtown Cumming, above a barber shop that made the stairwell smell like talcum powder and aftershave. Walt was 58, bald, built like a high school linebacker who'd aged into paperwork instead of coaching. He wore reading glasses on a chain and kept a framed copy of the Georgia Constitution on his wall, next to a photo of his coonhound. I laid everything on his desk. The screenshots, the survey, the certified mail receipts, the photos of the new lock, the timeline I'd been building since the night I found the schedule on my wall. Walt read through it in silence. Then he took off his glasses and looked at me. "Garrett, how many homes in Linden Falls?" 140. "And she's been charging $200 per household per year for 3 years?" I nodded. He did the math out loud. "That's $84,000. He paused. "Where did it go?" That was the question. And when Walt subpoenaed the HOA financial records, the ones Tammy and Denise had refused to show me, the answer was worse than I expected. The $84,000 wasn't in the HOA general fund. It wasn't in the reserve account. It was sitting in a separate account called the Linden Falls Community Enhancement Fund, an account that existed nowhere in the HOA's official filings, an account with exactly 2 authorized signers, Tammy Winslow and Denise Pruitt. Of the $84,000 collected, $31,000 had already been withdrawn. Check after check made out to maintenance and supplies, but there were no invoices, no receipts, no vendor records. The garage hadn't been maintained by anyone except me. The supplies were mine. The tools were mine. The electricity was mine. $31,000 had vanished into a paper trail that led nowhere and belonged to no one Tammy could name. Walt set the papers down and folded his hands. "This isn't a homeowner dispute anymore, Garrett. She's been collecting fees for access to property she doesn't own, depositing them into an unregistered account, and withdrawing funds without documentation. That's embezzlement. And depending on how the DA reads it, it could be wire fraud." I sat in that leather chair and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger, something quieter, clearer. Like the moment on a construction site when you finish the calculations and realize the structure everyone's been arguing about was never going to hold. The numbers don't lie. The foundation was rotten the whole time. Walt reached for his phone. "I'm going to call the Forsyth County DA's office. You okay with that?" "Yes." "Good." He put his glasses back on. "Because what she built isn't a community fund. It's a theft operation with a clipboard and a smile." That night I went into the garage. I'd had a locksmith change the lock back to one I controlled. I opened Ellen's blueprint drawer. Her original sketches for the garage were still there, rolled up in a cardboard tube. I unrolled them on the workbench and smoothed the edges. In the bottom right corner, in her handwriting, she'd written, "Workshop corner here, heart." I traced the letters with my fingertip, graphite on drafting paper, 3 years old and still legible. "I'm going to get it back, Elle," I said to the empty room. All of it. The garage was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. Outside, a mockingbird started singing in the river birch by the creek, the same one that sang every evening, the same one Ellen used to stop and listen to while she watered the garden. I rolled the blueprints back into their tube, set them in the drawer, and closed it gently. Then I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Names, dates, dollar amounts. The outline of a plan that Tammy Winslow would never see coming. The next 3 weeks moved like a countdown. I started with the garage itself. If Tammy was going to keep treating it like public property, I was going to make sure she couldn't get within 10 feet of the door. I drove to a rigging supply warehouse outside Atlanta, the kind of place where crane operators and tow truck drivers buy their hardware. I bought 40 feet of grade 100 alloy steel chain, 3/8 of an inch thick, rated for 12,000 pounds. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I loaded it into the truck bed. "Building a fortress?" he asked. "Something like that. Grade 100 chain can't be cut with a standard bolt cutter. You need an angle grinder with a cutting disc or an oxyacetylene torch, and even then, it takes time. Time that looks very bad on a security camera." I bought 4 Abloy Protect 2 padlocks from a specialty locksmith in Alpharetta. Pick resistant, drill resistant, the kind of lock that makes a professional locksmith shake his head and say, "You're not getting through that without the key." Each one cost more than the cheap brass padlock Tammy had installed on my door. I didn't care. I wasn't buying locks. I was buying time. Back at the garage, I welded 1/4-inch steel plates over the door hinges, inside and out. Nobody was going to pop the pins and lift the door off the frame. Then I ran the chain through custom-welded anchor points on the garage frame and the concrete pad. 4 separate chains, 4 separate locks. The setup took 2 full days. By the time I was done, the garage looked like a bank vault with a roll-up door. The cameras went up next. 4 Reolink units with night vision and motion detection. 2 aimed at the garage doors, 1 covering the driveway and street, 1 on the back corner covering the side yard. All of them wired to a hub inside the house, with automatic cloud backup. Every 30 seconds, 24 hours a day. I tested them at night by walking the perimeter myself. The footage was sharp enough to read the text on a license plate from 40 feet. While I worked the physical side, Walt worked the legal side. He filed a formal complaint with the Forsyth County District Attorney. Charges outlined: embezzlement of HOA funds, criminal trespass, fraud, and unauthorized use of private property. He included the survey, the financial records, the website screenshots, the certified mail chain, and the locksmith invoice from Thompson's Lock and Key, complete with Eddie Thompson's signature and the billing address that matched Craig Winslow's home. Walt also filed a complaint with the Georgia Real Estate Commission. Every home sold in Linden Falls over the past 3 years had included HOA disclosure documents listing a community workshop as an amenity. Those buyers paid for homes priced partly on the promise of access to a building that wasn't the HOA's to offer. That's misrepresentation under the Georgia Fair Business Practices Act, and it opened the door to lawsuits from every buyer who'd been misled. Here's the thing about real estate fraud that most people don't realize. It doesn't just expose the person who filed the false disclosure. It exposes the entire association. Every board member who signed off on those documents. Every officer who allowed the misrepresentation to continue. And in Georgia, the penalties include treble damages, meaning the court can triple whatever the buyers lost. The last piece was Nina Hargrove, reporter for the Forsyth County News. 39 years old, sharp, relentless. The kind of journalist who covers county commission meetings because she actually cares, not because she was assigned to. Walt connected us. I gave her everything. Documents, timeline, photos. She listened for 90 minutes without interrupting. "When do you want this to run?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "I'll let you know." Hank rallied the neighbors, quietly. 6 residents who'd been fed up with Tammy for years. Connie Averid, 60, retired school teacher, lived in Linden Falls for 15 years, was the loudest. "She raised our dues 3 times in 4 years, Connie said, standing in Hank's kitchen with a glass of iced tea. "The pool filter's been broken since April. The playground mulch hasn't been replaced in 2 years. But somehow there's money for a community enhancement fund nobody's ever seen." I had the chain, the cameras, the lawyer, the DA, the reporter, and 6 angry neighbors with receipts. All I needed now was the right moment. I stood in the garage that night and looked at the chains. Heavy, industrial, the kind of hardware that says, "This is not a suggestion." The steel caught the overhead light and threw a dull gleam across the concrete floor. I thought about Tammy standing in my driveway 2 years ago with her clipboard and her smile, asking for 1 week. 1 week that turned into a year that turned into $84,000, and a set of locks I couldn't open on my own building. Not anymore. This time, the locks were mine, and nobody was getting through them. Tammy found out about the cameras on a Tuesday. I know because she sent me a violation notice by 3 o'clock that afternoon. Hand-delivered, slipped under my front door, still warm from the printer. Notice of violation. Security cameras oriented toward common areas in violation of HOA Community Privacy Policy, Section 12.4. Remedy required within 72 hours or fines of $500 per day will be assessed. Section 12.4. I pulled up the Linden Falls CC and RS on my laptop and searched for it. It didn't exist. The privacy policy had 12 sections. There was no 12.4. Tammy had invented it. I showed the notice to Walt. He almost smiled. "Keep it," he said. "Fabricating HOA rules to intimidate a homeowner is another brick in the wall." Tammy didn't wait for the 72 hours. She called an emergency board meeting that Thursday night. I wasn't invited. Hank went instead. He called me from the parking lot afterward. 3-0 vote. Tammy, Craig, Denise. $500 a day until you remove the cameras and take the chains off the garage. They're also voting to place a lien on your house if the fines aren't paid within 30 days. 3 people. The same 3 people who changed my locks, stolen my property, and hidden $84,000, voting to punish me for protecting what was mine. The letter arrived the next day. Certified mail this time. Tammy had learned that trick from me. The language was aggressive. Words like non-compliance and enforcement action and involuntary lien. The kind of language designed to scare someone who doesn't know the difference between an HOA fine and actual law. I knew the difference. Then Craig called. It was 9:30 at night. I was in the garage finishing a coat of Danish oil on the rocking chair. The phone buzzed on the workbench and his name lit up the screen. Garrett. His voice was low and slow, like a man choosing each word the way you choose where to step in a minefield. I wanted to reach out, man to man. I'm listening. You know I sit on the County Planning Commission. I know. Permit records are interesting things. Sometimes they're clean. Sometimes they need a second look. Sometimes things get flagged during a re-review. I'm not saying anything would happen. I'm just saying the process can be unpredictable. The implication was clear. He was threatening to pull my building permit, retroactively challenge the approval of a garage that had been standing for 5 years, use his position on the Planning Commission to harass me through county bureaucracy. Is that a threat, Craig? It's a conversation, Garrett, between neighbors. Okay. I kept my voice flat, calm. The Danish oil smelled like linseed and walnut, warm and thick in the closed garage. Thanks for the conversation. I hung up. Then I saved the recording. Georgia is a one-party consent state. That means if you're a participant in a conversation, you can record it without telling the other person. It's legal, completely legal. And Craig Winslow had just put his name, his title, and his threat on a recording that my attorney would have on his desk by morning. Walt listened to it twice. Then he forwarded it to the DA's office with a cover letter that included the words, abuse of public office, and witness intimidation. Craig just made your case about 30% stronger, Walt said, and he did it for free. The fines kept coming. $500 a day, printed on HOA letterhead, slipped under my door every morning like a newspaper nobody subscribed to. I collected them in a manila folder. By the end of the second week, the folder was thick enough to prop open a door. I didn't pay a single one. Walt sent one response letter. Short, clean, 5 sentences. The fines are unenforceable because the property in question is not under HOA jurisdiction. The cameras are lawfully installed on private property. Any attempt to place a lien based on fabricated violations will be challenged in court and reported to the Georgia Attorney General. Tammy never responded to the letter, but the fines stopped after day 19. She was regrouping. I could feel it. The way you feel pressure change before a storm, not through any single sign, but through the silence between them. I checked the cameras every night before bed. The garage sat there in the green glow of the night vision feed. Chains in place, locks secure, the laminated sign catching headlights whenever a car passed on the street. It looked like a statement. It looked like a man drawing a line in his own yard and daring anyone to cross it. That's exactly what it was. 2 weeks before the annual block party, Tammy made her move. She needed the garage. The block party was her crown jewel. The one event each year where she stood at the center of the neighborhood with a megaphone and a clipboard and acted like the mayor of a town she'd invented. For 3 years, she'd used my garage as the staging area. Tables, chairs, decorations, the sound system, the folding canopy poles, all of it stored and prepped inside my building. This year, the garage was chained shut, and Tammy was not the kind of woman who adjusted her plans. I was at Hank's house on a Saturday morning, helping him rewire an outlet in his kitchen, when my phone buzzed. Motion alert, camera 2, garage front. I opened the app and watched in real time. Tammy stood in my driveway in white capris and a coral blazer, pointing at the chains like a general directing a siege. Next to her, Eddie Thompson knelt in front of the garage door with a pair of 36-inch bolt cutters. He clamped them around the first chain link and squeezed. The handles bent. The chain didn't. Grade 100 alloy. 12,000 pounds of tensile strength. Eddie might as well have tried to cut through a fire hydrant with kitchen scissors. He stood up, shook his head, and walked back to his van. Came back with an angle grinder. The whine of the disc spinning up cut through the Saturday morning quiet like a dentist's drill. He pressed the blade against the chain. Orange sparks cascaded across the concrete, bouncing off Tammy's white capris. She didn't move. She watched the sparks the way a queen watches a drawbridge being lowered. Like the wall was an inconvenience, not a boundary. I called 911 from Hank's kitchen. I'd like to report a break-in at 1847 Ridgewood Lane. 2 individuals are using power tools to cut through security chains on my private garage. I have it on live camera. Deputy Lane Caldwell arrived in 9 minutes. I was back in my own driveway by the time he pulled up. Eddie had managed to cut through one chain link, but hadn't removed the lock. The angle grinder sat on the concrete, still warm, the air thick with the bitter smell of scorched metal and grinding dust. Tammy didn't flinch when the deputy stepped out. "Officer, I'm Tammy Winslow, president of the Linden Falls Homeowners Association. This structure is a community facility, and we have every right to access it for scheduled maintenance." I handed Deputy Caldwell a copy of the survey. He read it, standing on the driveway, the paper tilting in the afternoon sun. "Ma'am, according to this survey, the structure is located entirely on private property, Lot 47, owned by Mr. Sullivan. That survey is outdated. It's dated 6 weeks ago, ma'am." Tammy's face went the color of the coral blazer. She turned to Eddie. Eddie was already putting the angle grinder back in his van. "Ma'am, I'm going to advise you and your associate to leave this property immediately. Any further attempt to access this structure without the owner's consent will result in criminal trespass charges." Tammy leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume over the burnt metal. "This isn't over, Garrett. Not by a long shot. I will make your life in this neighborhood a living hell." "Ma'am," Deputy Caldwell said, "I'd suggest you stop talking." She stopped. But the look she gave me as she walked to her Escalade was pure venom. The kind of hatred that comes from someone who spent so long being obeyed that being told no feels like violence. Deputy Caldwell filed an incident report. I gave him the camera footage on a thumb drive. Eddie Thompson's face, Tammy's face, the angle grinder, the sparks, the chain, everything. That night, Walt called. "DA is presenting to the grand jury next Friday, 1 week after the block party." I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and texted Nina Hargrove. "You might want to be at the Linden Falls annual block party this Saturday. Bring a photographer." She replied in 12 seconds. Wouldn't miss it. I went back to the garage, sat on the stool. The new rocking chair stood next to the workbench, finished, the oak gleaming under the shop lights. I ran my hand along the arm. Smooth, warm. The kind of work Ellen would have run her fingers across and said, "Now that's a chair." I looked at her photo on the wall. Her holding the garage blueprints, smiling. "Almost there, Elle." Saturday, October. The kind of Georgia afternoon where the sky is so blue it looks painted, and the air smells like grilled meat and fresh-cut grass. The Linden Falls annual block party filled the main cul-de-sac. White tents, folding tables covered in checkered tablecloths, a bouncy castle leaking air at one corner, kids running through a sprinkler somebody hooked up to a garden hose, country music playing from a Bluetooth speaker balanced on a cooler, 200 residents, maybe more, scattered across lawns and sidewalks with paper plates and plastic cups. Tammy was in her element. White sundress, pearl earrings, megaphone in one hand, clipboard in the other. She moved through the crowd like a hostess at a party she was throwing in her own living room, smiling, pointing, directing volunteers like orchestra musicians. At 2:15, the first group walked toward my garage to get the extra tables. They stopped at the door. 40 feet of grade 100 chain, 4 abloy padlocks, a steel plate reinforced door, and a laminated sign zip-tied to the chain. Private property, not an HOA amenity. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The group stood there for a moment. Then they turned around and told Tammy. I watched from the porch, coffee in hand. The rocking chair, Ellen's rocking chair, the one I'd finished 2 weeks ago, creaking gently under me. Tammy crossed the cul-de-sac in 12 seconds. She didn't walk, she marched. The sundress billowed, the megaphone swung at her side. She read the sign, read it again. Then she turned toward my house and raised the megaphone. "Garrett Sullivan, open this garage right now. You are disrupting a community event and violating your obligations as a Linden Falls homeowner. Her voice echoed off the houses. 200 people stopped what they were doing. The country music kept playing, but nobody was listening to it anymore. I set down my coffee, stood up, walked down the porch steps with a manila folder under my arm. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. "This garage is on lot 47, I said, loud enough for the crowd, calm enough to sound like a man reading a weather report. My lot, surveyed, recorded, and deeded in my name. It has never been community property." The board voted. The board can't vote to take someone's private property. That's not how the law works. And you know that, Tammy. The crowd shifted. Whispers. A few people pulled out phones. I opened the folder. "Over the past 3 years, you've collected $84,000 in workshop access fees from residents of this neighborhood. Fees for access to my garage, on my property, using my electricity." I held up the bank statements Walt had obtained. "Where did that money go?" Silence. The bouncy castle hissed in the background. A kid laughed somewhere behind the tents, but in the cul-de-sac, nobody moved. Tammy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That money went to community improvements and maintenance." "What improvements?" Connie Averett's voice cut through from the middle of the crowd. 60 years old, reading glasses on a chain, standing next to a table of untouched brownies. "The pool filter's been broken since March. The playground mulch is 2 years old. Where's the money, Tammy?" More voices, more questions. The crowd wasn't whispering anymore. That's when Walt Jeffries stepped out of his car at the end of the street. Dark suit, leather briefcase. He walked through the crowd like a man who'd been to 100 courtrooms and never once been surprised by what he found in them. Behind him, Nina Hargrove, notepad in hand, photographer beside her, already shooting. And behind Nina, Deputy Lane Caldwell, uniform, badge, a second deputy at his side. They walked straight to Tammy. "Mrs. Winslow?" Deputy Caldwell held out a folded document. "You've been served. Criminal summons. Forsyth County District Attorney's Office. Charges include embezzlement, fraud, and criminal trespass." Tammy took the paper. Her hands shook. She looked at Craig, who was standing near the grill. Craig looked at the deputies, then at Nina's photographer. Then he took 3 steps backward and disappeared into the crowd. The megaphone slipped from Tammy's hand and hit the asphalt with a hollow crack. I picked it up, clicked it on. The feedback whined for half a second, then cleared. She called it community property. My voice carried across the entire block. The county calls it theft, and this garage stays chained until every dollar is accounted for. The crowd was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Connie Averett started clapping. Hank joined. Then the family next to the bouncy castle. Then the couple by the grill. It spread like a wave, not thunderous, but steady. The sound of a neighborhood choosing a side. The country music was still playing. Something about small-town Saturday nights. For the first time in 3 years, it felt true. The Forsyth County News ran Nina's story the following Wednesday. Front page, below the fold. HOA president charged with embezzling $84,000 from residents. The photo showed Tammy holding the criminal summons in her sundress, the chained garage visible in the background. The article detailed everything: the workshop access fees, the unregistered account, the $31,000 in undocumented withdrawals, the fake privacy policy, the lock change, the angle grinder, and Craig's threatening phone call. Tammy's attorney negotiated a plea within 6 weeks. 18 months supervised probation, full repayment of the $84,000, a permanent ban from holding any HOA position in Georgia, and a public apology read into the record at the Forsyth County Courthouse. Craig resigned from the Planning Commission before the ethics investigation reached his desk. Denise Pruitt was removed by a vote of 93-4. She repaid $4,200 in consulting fees nobody could explain. Eddie Thompson lost his locksmith license for 2 years. Tammy listed her house 3 weeks after the plea deal. It sold in 11 days. The white Escalade rolled through the Linden Falls gate for the last time on a Thursday morning in December. I was in the garage when she left. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. Hank told me later that she didn't look back. Not at her house, not at the neighbors she'd terrorized, not at the garage she'd tried to steal. She just drove through the gate and turned left and disappeared into the traffic on Highway 9 like she'd never existed at all. The neighborhood elected Connie Averett as HOA president in January. She ran unopposed. Her first act was a full financial audit. Her second was abolishing the workshop access fee. Every household received a $600 refund check. The pool filter was replaced by February. The playground got fresh mulch in March. For the first time in years, dues actually went where they were supposed to. In April, the new board approved construction of a real community workshop on Lot 12, a piece of common area near the creek that had been sitting empty since the subdivision was built. The neighborhood raised $42,000 through voluntary contributions. A contractor broke ground in May. I donated Ellen's tools, her handsaw, her claw hammer, the measuring tape she kept clipped to her apron the summer before she got sick. That was the summer we stood side by side at the workbench, and she sanded a picture frame so carefully you'd have thought she was restoring something that belonged in a museum. The workshop opened in September, 1,200 square feet, pine framing, big windows facing the creek. On the wall beside the entrance, the board mounted a brass plaque. The Ellen Sullivan Community Workshop, built by neighbors, for neighbors. I stood in front of that plaque on opening day. Hank beside me, Connie, a dozen families I hadn't known a year ago. The smell of fresh-cut pine drifted through the open doors. Someone was already test running the table saw. A kid swept sawdust off the floor and laughed about it. Hank put his hand on my shoulder. She'd have loved this. Yeah, I looked at the brass letters catching the afternoon sun. She would have been the first one through the door. That night, I went home to my garage. My garage. Quiet. Private. Just the way it was supposed to be. The rocking chair sat next to Ellen's workbench. I poured a cup of coffee, turned on the radio, and picked up a piece of sandpaper. Nobody else's schedule on the wall. Nobody else's junk on the floor. Just the smell of cedar and the sound of my own hands working. If your HOA has ever treated your property like it belongs to them, drop your story in the comments. I promise you're not alone. And if this story reminded you why documentation, patience, and a good attorney matter more than shouting, hit that subscribe button. Next time, I've got a story about an HOA president who built a fence on someone else's land, and then sent them the bill.
Think about what actually brought Tyranny Winslow down. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a man who kept records. Garrett didn't win because he was louder. He won because he was quieter. He documented everything, understood the law, and waited until the evidence was so overwhelming that the outcome was inevitable before he ever raised his voice. That's the real lesson. When someone with petty power decides your property is theirs, your biggest weapon isn't anger, it's paper. A property survey, certified mail receipts, financial records requests your HOA are legally required to honor. Camera footage with timestamps, every one of those tools is available to you right now. And look at what happened when the dust settled. The money came back. The board changed. A real workshop got built, named after a woman who believed in building things together. That's what happens when one person refuses to let a bully rewrite the rules. If you dealt with an HOA that thought your property was theirs, drop a story in the comments. And if you want more stories where the little guy wins, hit subscribe. Next time, an HOA president who built a fence on someone else's land and then sent them the bill.